and rightly so. To everyone I asked this question to, most gave me a confused look and were like, what even is Web5? Like, obviously Web3, apart from one person who, funnily enough, is actually here today. And she was like, Web3, sorry, she was like, Web5, obviously. But it just went to show the fact that Web5 is poorly understood, and obviously that's why Angie here today, and we really need to get across that sort of chasm. The awkward thing about the fact that the person that said Web5 is that her name is Antonia, she's sat on the front row, and her actual job role is Web3 lead at Save the Children. So we're going to change that to Web5 lead, aren't we? I'm really sorry to embarrass you. I didn't realize you were going to be here today. Yeah, there you go. And with that, it's over to learning about Web5 with Angie. So can we have a round of applause, please?
Hi, everyone. I'm Angie Jones. I am the head of developer relations for Block's newest business unit, TBD, which is focused on decentralized technologies. Today, I want to talk about the web. So the web was invented to decentralize communications, yes? The ethos was anyone can publish any information to anyone in the world without the approval of any central entity. And the web revolutionized the way that we interact. However, it's missing a key element, an identity layer. So applications that require user accounts have to collect our data in order to persist it with our content, right? Major powerhouses such as Facebook and Google have tried to help alleviate some of this by enabling us to authenticate with these third-party applications via their services, but we have very little agency over our information. What if we could own and control both our identity and our data across the web? This is possible with the Decentralized Web platform. It embraces the convenience of the account model that we know in Web 2, but it also restores control back to the users, an ethos of Web 3. The harmony of these two views is what we're calling Web 5. So Web 5 enables developers to build decentralized applications while it abstracts away a lot of the complexity of doing so. So there are three main pillars to Web 5. We have decentralized identifiers, also known as DIDs or DIDs. We have verifiable credentials, and then also decentralized web nodes. Now I want to walk you through each one of these in more detail. So the identifiers that we know and use today are owned by some intermediary, whether that be the government or a company or an organization. For example, my email address is an identifier that's associated with me, right? I use it all over the web to authenticate and identify myself, but I don't own that. Google does. My Twitter handle is an identifier associated with me, and that's owned by Twitter or the new guy that's running the place, right? So I can manage these identifiers to a certain degree, but I don't own or control them. So before we can realize truly decentralized applications, we first need identifiers that we own and control ourselves. And this will remove that dependency on centralized entities to authenticate and represent us across the web. So decentralized identifiers are a W3C standard, and they're simply this long string of text that has a standardized structure consisting of three parts. So we have a scheme that's always going to be DID. We have the identifier for a DID method. This usually resolves to some sort of CRUD operation, so create, read, update, or delete. And then we have a GUID of the DID subject. So that's the person, the place, or the thing that is being identified. DIDs are the only part of the Web 5 system that's stored on a blockchain. And it's just this simple string, not people's actual information, because we think that's kind of wild. What's great about having the standardized formatting for DIDs is that it works across any of the blockchains or no blockchain at all. So here's an example of DID on Bitcoin, also on Ethereum, and then a web DID that doesn't use blockchain. So notice that they all use the same format. We have the scheme, the method, and then the identifier. Storing DIDs on Ion, which is a layer 2 DID network running on top of Bitcoin, is the preferred design decision for the implementation of Web5. So a DID, since it lives on chain and everything else is off chain, essentially acts as a URI that points to a DID document, which has more information about the DID subject. So you can think of this as a key value pair where the DID is the key, the document is the value, and DID documents are stored in some sort of decentralized storage system such as IPFS. The document is a JSON file. It describes how do you interact with the DID subject. So it contains things like the DID's public keys, authentication, and verification methods, okay? So that's decentralized identifiers. The second pillar of Web5 is verifiable credentials, also a W3C standard. They work hand in hand with decentralized identifiers to enable trustless interactions, meaning two parties do not need to know or trust one another in order to engage, but claims that are made about a subject can be verified. Let me show you with an example. So let's say that Alice wanted to apply for a loan and the lender needed to verify her employment. So Alice's employer, Acme, could issue a cryptographically signed verifiable credential which would be stored in Alice's identity wallet. And I want to double click inside of that credential so that you see what's in there. So notice here we have a DID for the issuer, which is Acme. We have a DID for the subject, which is Alice. And then we have claims that are being made by the issuer about the subject. All right? So Alice's name, her full name is one of the claims, as well as her salary. That's all that's needed. So we're preserving a lot of other information about Alice, right? Only giving them what's needed. And then this is cryptographically signed by the issuer. So when the lender requests proof of employment from Alice, she could present them with this verifiable credential that she's storing in her wallet. And this credential is, again, cryptographically signed by Acme as well as Alice. So this is a nice, easy, machine-readable way to share credentials across the web, okay? The lender doesn't know or trust Alice, but that's okay. They do consider Acme a trustworthy entity, therefore distributing trust to Alice. The final component of Web5 is decentralized web nodes. So today, centralized entities act as our data stores, right? Applications, they hold all of our content and our preferences on their platforms. Decentralized web nodes changes this by allowing us to decouple our data from the applications that we use, and instead we can host our data ourselves in our own personal data stores. So Blue Sky is a good example. It's a decentralized version of Twitter in the works, hit the iOS store this week, yay. With something like this, your tweets, your connections are not stored with the application. They're stored with you. So what this means is that following that you've built up, all of that content you've been creating for the last 10 years is now portable, right? You can present it on any decentralized social media application. So if there's decentralized Instagram or decentralized TikTok or wherever, you bring your social graph, you bring your content with you, and you don't have to start from zero. Your web node can hold both public as well as encrypted data. For example, in the case of decentralized Twitter, you want stuff like your tweets and your connections to be public. You want things like your DMs to be encrypted. Your decentralized web nodes also do not live on the blockchain, because why would you want your tweets and your DMs on a public immutable ledger? You wouldn't, right? So the web nodes are hosted locally. You can replicate them across your various devices, clouds. All the data will be synced. Now, I'm sure you're saying to yourselves, I don't know, Angie, people don't want to host their own nodes. And I hear you. You're right. As powerful as our phones are these days, it's not the daunting task that it once was. However, I'm sure that convenience will prevail, as always, and there will likely be vendors who are offering to host your web nodes for you, likely for free, right? Yes, that does skew the decentralization spectrum, right? So folks who are here today who, took time to come to a Bitcoin conference, you would likely want to hold your own nodes for maximum decentralization. But for other people, they could trade some of that if they desired. Now, this is definitely a paradigm shift in how we exchange data, but it's not a total overhaul of the web that we already know. So your decentralized web apps would work very much so like a progressive web app, except you'd add the decentralized web node SDK, and then applications are free to truly go serverless because the data isn't stored with them. Our web nodes are associated with our decentralized identifiers, and they're listed in our DID document. So notice this section of the DID doc specifies service endpoints, and it provides URIs to the decentralized web nodes. So given an application has the address to my web nodes, they can send me a request for data. This snippet here represents a request from an application to obtain all objects within my web node that follow the social media posting schema. The data within our web nodes are JSON objects. They follow this universal standard. That makes it possible for any application to discover and process the data given its semantic type. So if this data is public, those objects will automatically be returned to the application. If the data is private, then the node owner would need to grant the application access to that data. All right? So that covers the pillars of Web 5. Obviously, all of this is pretty complicated, especially for non-technical users. And as I often remind builders in the space, decentralization alone is not a feature that the average user is requesting, right? So we need a simple, easy-to-use interface that allows people to manage all of this and essentially makes decentralization an implementation detail. So we're doing an identity wallet, which would provide ways to manage all of this. I think of it as my remote control. So you can manage the data that's in your web nodes and who has access to that. You can manage your identifiers and the context in which those might be used. You can manage your verifiable credentials, so receiving those as well as presenting them to others. Now, Web 5 enables developers to build decentralized applications on top of it. The individual components are all open standards, and they don't belong to any one company. What my team, TBD, is doing is working on the implementation of these standards, aggregating them together to make this platform Web 5. This is all open source. You're free to use this as your foundation and focus your attention on what you really care about, which is your app. So what's the benefit to decoupling our data from the apps that we use? Well, here's one example of many where Amazon has essentially been on an acquisition spree, right? They're on pace to have a comprehensive view of just about every area of our lives. And we've been conditioned to give a little bit of data here, a little bit of data there to these various companies. Some of that has been out of necessity, but most for convenience, right? We enjoy having things that are tailored to our needs and our preferences, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. However, these companies are taking advantage of that, and they're now aggregating that data to put the puzzle pieces of your life together. And with this, we're seeing a lot of scary stuff. There was a news story a couple of months ago about MyChart. Anybody saw that one? No? Okay, let me give you the tea. So, MyChart is a patient portal, and they sent people's private health information to Facebook of all companies. Yes, the same Facebook where a couple of engineers were in court, essentially letting the courts know, look, we have so much data on people, we can't manage it all. Don't ask us anything, right? That Facebook. So your private information, health information was sent there. That's really scary stuff, in my opinion. So Web5 prescribes that by decoupling the data, we maintain control, but we still can enjoy the personal customizations and the convenience while we use the apps that we do. But why would anyone buy into this model? Why would companies buy into it? Well, data is a liability, right? Tech companies, they often find themselves involved in all sorts of controversial cases simply because they own users' data. And this isn't the business that they want to be in, right? The good news is that they can minimize their dealings in such cases by discontinuing to collect all of this data. And frankly, the misuse of the user data has become quite expensive in light of GDPR laws. Here's some recent fines for not acquiring proper consent to collect data or for data breaches. I also want you to consider the flip side of this. So by enabling data portability between applications, this allows companies to have a seamless onboarding experience for users that are coming from competitors, right? So as opposed to getting a brand new user who they know nothing about, they can request access to relevant data from your web node. They now have this rich history of your preferences and your content, so they can better serve you from day one. Then apps can focus on competing on the quality of their service. All right, so speaking of apps, the sky literally is the limit to what you can build on top of this platform. Pretty much anything you think of. You want to build a decentralized app, you can do so here. I included a couple of basic examples just to give you some ideas. So no one likes recreating their music playlists over and over. Like, we pretty much stayed locked into a vendor because of it, right? With Web5, you wouldn't have to do that. So in this scenario, Spotify has access to write to Alice's decentralized web node, and they add a new entry for a playlist. Tidal has access to read Alice's node, so they can read the new entry that Spotify just added, and now Alice has her playlist readily available on both of these apps, okay? Your travel preferences, your tickets, your reservations, all of this stuff is scattered across so many different hotels and airlines and rental car agencies and travel apps, right? And it makes it really difficult to coordinate all of this. Heaven forbid there's some problem with your flight, like it's delayed or something like that. So you end up trying to get in touch with the car rental place. You know they're running short on cars, so you got to let them know you're coming. Please don't give it away. If it's getting really late, you need to call the hotel, let them know. Please don't give my room away. All of this while you're hustling and bustling at the airport. So Web5 can help unify these various experiences. If Alice gives the hotel, the airline, and the rental car agency access to the trip objects in her web node, they can react and adjust accordingly to any changes. Now, the ability to own my medical records is something I particularly look forward to. Within the last 5 years, I have moved to 3 different states, which means I need new sets of doctors every time I move, and it's been a pain trying to catch the new doctors up with my medical history, especially if you have specialists for various things. And I'll be honest, I don't remember like all of my doctor's names and my old medical records and all of this stuff, right? So I'm having to like repeat tests with new doctors because they don't have any history to go on. With Web5, your medical records can be encrypted and stored in your decentralized web node. That way, you always have access to your complete medical history. So in this example, Alice's primary care provider uploads her medical records to her web node. The records are encrypted, so no one has access unless Alice specifically grants it to them. And even if she doesn't move to a new state like I did, when Alice needs to see a specialist or a new doctor, she can grant them access to her records, as well as maybe give her another doctor the authority to do so. All right, so these are just a few applications that can be realized by building on top of Web5. There's so many more possibilities once we have the truly decentralized web like it was always intended to be. All right, I'm super excited about this technology, but I don't want to leave you with unicorns and fairy dust. There's still a lot of problems that need to be solved. So let's get into some of those. So as we all know, people are notorious for forgetting passwords, for losing keys. So we have to address things like, how do users not lose access to their data, right? How do they regain access if they're locked out of a device or their identity wallet? This is a problem across the entire space, as I'm sure you know. This isn't unique to Web5, so fortunately, we aren't the only ones who are thinking about this, and I'm hopeful that with so many brilliant minds actively working on this, we'll have a solution that's secure as well as user-friendly. Another huge question that actually keeps me up at night is, once you grant an application access to this data, how can you control what they do with it, right? So what's preventing them from making a copy and storing it on their servers or selling it to third parties? So we love to establish like a personal terms of service for data usage where misuse of that data would result in some sort of legal consequences. Hopefully we can create this universal system for transparent and accountable usage of personal data. We have a bit of precedents working in our favor, such as GDPR. Now, Web5 deals with semantic data, where the objects within your personal web nodes, they follow some sort of schema. I've shown examples today where different parties interact with the same data because it's assumed that this data is following a common schema that both of those applications deal with, right? For example, the patient schema for medical records or the music playlist schema for streaming service. These are all from schema.org, who specializes in promoting schemas for like structured data on the internet. However, that being said, we have no plans to enforce this, the use of any given schemas in order to achieve interoperability. In fact, I'm not sure we could if we wanted to. So if someone like developed a new app and they use their own schema, that's their prerogative to do so. Our hope is that applications organically realize the benefit of being interoperable with other applications, right? It makes for a pleasant user experience, and when this becomes mainstream, users are going to be able to expect that they'll be able to port their data from this app to that one. And if your app doesn't allow such interoperability with others, then ultimately it locks the user in, and that'll be frowned upon, hopefully. All right. So that is Web5 in a nutshell. It's open source. Again, it's built on open standards. We welcome all of you to contribute to making the web that we all deserve. You can find us at tbd.website. We have links to our GitHub projects, to our Discord, If you want to check out the work, all of that's there. You want to contribute. We have open job recs if anybody wants to come work on decentralized technologies. If you're a company, you're trying to solve some of these same problems, we'd love to collaborate as well. If you want to just like keep up with the progress, we do have areweweb5yet.com, and that'll show you the progress. Any questions?
I'll work my way back down this side.
Thank you for your talk. Taking the Spotify example, why would Spotify reduce the friction to the customer to move to a competitor?
So a couple of reasons. One is, on the flip side, they want to receive competitors. So if I want to receive people from, what's the other big ones? Apple Music, all of that, then you need to be interoperable with it. Also, I really strongly believe, like, if this becomes mainstream and this is the norm, if you're Spotify and you're not letting people out and you're locking them in, then the word gets out, don't use Spotify. I don't want to be locked into a vendor. So I think there'll be some market pressure there, as well as just that advantage of them being able to intake and onboard new customers easily.
It's a give and take, yeah.
Yeah, it's a give and take, exactly.
Stuff. Green jumper?
Hi, I'm wondering about scalability challenges. If my decentralized app has to connect to like 1,000 or 100,000 web nodes to fetch data that they're going to render, like how does that work?
Yeah, great question. So it's about like scalability. I have it like actually on my to-do list to write some stuff about performance and things like that. Like if you're trying to build, like a decentralized app that has a news feed, for example, I don't want to have to ping, hundreds of web nodes to pull and aggregate that data together, right? So I don't have like a good concrete answer for you right now. It exists. I basically need to put this together on how you would do that. So I want to do like a lot of content series around like that, as well as other questions. How do you like do authentication in like this sort of app?
Great. I think there's one more. Yeah.
Thank you for that. So many questions. One is the decentralized web nodes. Is it possible to outsource that or semi-outsource that and have multiple decentralized web nodes for yourself?
Yes.
And does the protocol allow for the automatic synchronization between those? And what state is TBD and Web5 in terms of people building on it and so on?
Yeah. Okay, so yes, you can have multiple web nodes. You can have them for different contexts if you like. You can basically manage all of those with that identity wallet. So I can put in there, like, these are my 5 web nodes, for example, right? And then you asked something else on that question.
Does the protocol automatically allow the synchronization between those, or do you have to?
Yeah, so the synchronization between those. So since everything is controlled by your wallet, you can essentially link those. So all of these are my web nodes, and yeah. As far as building on top and the status of that, Zion is an application that has recently released they built on an earlier version of Web5, and they had a release maybe 2 weeks ago. So they're in the App Store. Definitely check them out. It's still in early phases. We haven't had an official release yet. We're looking to do that in May, so that areweweb5yet.com URL will explain exactly like where we are and exactly like what still needs to be done.
Apparently it's at 57%. I just
Yes.
checked. We are in the break right now, guys. Do feel free to take refreshments next door, but in the meantime, I think we should still keep asking
Okay,
questions.
sure.
Yeah, one more.
Hi, thanks for your talk. A question about privacy and data usage. So for Amazon, let's say, it's worth it right now to pay the GDPR fines because they make more than the $1 billion fine every year in like having complete user profiles of people. With DIDs, you mentioned the personal terms of service. This sounds great, but it would need to have teeth, and it would need to probably have bigger teeth than GDPR in order to prevent Amazon from still like collecting all of the individual pieces of data, building a profile of you, and so on.
So if I'm Amazon, this is what I think, right? Right now I'm on the hook. Yes, I'm getting hit with these fees that might be minimal, you know, compared to like my bottom line. However, it's still a liability that I don't have to take on. If I were Amazon, what I would do was offer to host people's web nodes for them for free. Any of that data that's public in your web node, now you have all of this aggregated. You don't have to go and like search all over the web to put those pieces together. Basically, anything that I'm comfortable with being public, you now have all of that right there on Amazon servers hosting that, right? So folks like us will be like, nah, I see your game, Amazon. I'm going to host my own web node so that you don't have that information. But the vast majority of people don't want to do that. So they will gladly hand over that responsibility to Amazon. So I think they will embrace it because it's more beneficial for them and less liability.
Couple more questions?
I have a question about how do you envision the protocol working for the accountable use of data? Do you imagine that every time, say, you want to send your medical records, there would be a unique mutation for a given provider or some sort of token attribution such that if the data were to leak, you would be able to see it? And if so, which is a big if, how would you make sure that the given provider wouldn't be able to, say, remove the trackability from your data? Or would you require a new signature from the issuer of that data that would incorporate the new trackability token? Just, you know, what is the protocol?
Right. So, yeah, they basically, when I grant them access to that, they are allowed to like basically read that data, or I can give them write access so that they could write or whatever. I can revoke these at any time. In that case, I would need to like reauthorize them. As far as trackability, I don't know. Yeah.
If I understand DIDs correctly, it's possible for someone to migrate their key to a new key. So if their key is the root of their identity, they can adopt a new one without losing their playlists or their social media connections. Is it also possible to migrate from one registry to another, like a website to Ion, for example? Do you know?
Since they follow that same standard, I think that's possible. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe so since they follow the same structure. It just would be like the DID method that would need to be updated based on like the new registry. Yeah.
One more round of applause for Angie. Great talk. And